podcast that hits healthcare with candid conversation and curiosity, so you can stop getting schmelthy and start getting healthy. This is Healthy Schmelthy. And who am I, you may be asking? Who is this voice that dares to deem what is healthy and what is schmelthy? Well, that's a fair question. My career is in healthcare data, and I have a master's of public health, so I think that qualifies me to be your podcast's masters of ceremonies. I'm Rishi B. Thank you so much for joining me on my mission to demystify healthcare. And the question that I'll be addressing in this episode is, how can I prepare for end-of-life care? I share a conversation I had with a friend and fellow podcaster, Joe Hood, about caring for his mom, Stephanie Hood, before she died from lung cancer. And I think there's a lot of different tips and kind of factors that you can take away from this conversation, some of which being the importance of preparing for end of life. So if you have a loved one or if you're someone who may be dealing with this, there's a lot of different tools and information available to you. For example, Joe will talk about the importance of his mom declaring a medical power of attorney. And we'll also kind of unwrap the process of death. You know, speaking as someone who works in healthcare, I have a fairly decent sense of what a hospital is like and urgent care and things like that. However, some of these different facilities like hospice and skilled nursing facilities that deal with end-of-life care don't have a great sense of that. So through this conversation, Joe will share what it was like for the hospice that his mom went to. So typically at the top of the episode, I'd share the top healthcare stories in the news. Considering this episode's subject, I'll just do a truncated version of that. In the news right now, there's a lot about coronavirus, and you may have seen some increase in case numbers and also some news about ship quarantines. And actually, the ship quarantines are on their way down, the most prominent being the ship quarantines around Japan. A lot of those are being ended. And also, the coronavirus cases, the rate of increase in new cases is actually going dramatically down, which is good news, especially as a vaccine is about a year away in development. However, considering all that, the number of cases since my previous podcast episode and this episode, the number of cases has almost doubled. However, the number of cases where people have recovered from the vaccine, from the virus, is about 16,000. So that's pretty good news. So the World Health Organization currently has a travel with caution. They're not saying don't travel at all, but unless you're next to someone who's symptomatic with the virus, then you're not at risk for getting the disease. And the chance of you being with someone who is symptomatic goes up dramatically if you're going to the Wuhan area of China. Otherwise, the chances of you seeing someone with the virus is very slim. So just wanted to share some of that news about the virus. I'll have links to articles and different tidbits that I found interesting in the news at the show notes for this episode at rishib.com. And make sure to follow me on Twitter, that's at rishibh, and like the Healthy Schmelthy Facebook page for news and healthcare updates. And I appreciate a subscription to this podcast and also an iTunes review. Okay, now without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Joe Hood. Joe and I, we met through participating in a podcasting reality show that's called America's Next Top Podcaster. That becomes relevant later on in this conversation, so I just wanted to make sure that you knew that's where we met, because we talk about that as though you will know what that is. And once again, we're going to talk about what it's like to care for a loved one while they're dying. And I think this conversation kind of demystifies the process of death, which I think is very important. And Joe's family sent me a Happy New Year card. And on that, they mentioned that Stephanie Hood's, one of her mottos was decrease BS and increase joy. And I think that is the overall arching motto of this conversation. Joe, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, you're welcome, Rishi. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. Before we get too far into our conversation, do you want to share a little bit with the folks about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I run my own business doing leadership development programs. I design and teach programs for companies on how people can improve their leadership. And really at the core of that, what I actually spend my time doing is helping the people in the program, or helping someone who's delivering the program help the people in the program figure out how to treat people as people instead of treating people as objects that help them get what they need. That's kind of my personal mission, is to help us all realize the humanity in one another in our day-to-day lives.
Interesting. Okay. And so we're here to talk about, a very emotional experience that you dealt with recently, which was the death of your mom. And before we get too far, we're talking about some of your mom's experiences. She died from lung cancer. But before we get too far, I feel like we're kind of talking about a person, who was here and had a life. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your mom, what she did and where she grew up?
Oh, sure. Yeah. My mother's name, Stephanie Hood, born Stephanie Winter. She was the daughter of a fisherman and a maid's maid. So my grandfather was a commercial fisherman. He actually passed away in a fishing accident in Narragansett Harbor.
No kidding.
And yeah, and in fact, because of that accident, he and 6 other people died in the same day. That's
wow.
The reason, they're part of the main reason that in Rhode Island they have the Blessing of the Fleet Festival every year, where they bless the fleet. Right after that happened, they started, blessing the fleet to help slow that down.
Wow.
And my mom told me that story many times. And I never quite believed her, because my mom also every once in a while would claim some heritage connection to Alexander the Great or some German monarch or something.
Okay.
And I was always a little dubious of that. But it turns out to be completely true. There's a lost fisherman's memorial in Point Judith, Rhode Island, with my grandfather's name and his brother and his uncle and his cousins. So mom grew up in Narragansett, Rhode Island. We got married young, right out of high school. Didn't go to college until later in life. She and my dad ran their own company. By the time I came around, they were running a trucking company in
interesting.
She did all the office work. She was the office manager, the dispatcher, she was the accountant. My dad was the mechanic and the salesman and a driver. And that's how they ran their life all through my childhood until I was an adult, until, my dad kind of slowed down and then retired.
Did your mom, just out of curiosity, did she go to school later in life, you were saying, for business or something like that?
You know what? She went back to school for a few semesters, a couple of years, maybe. She never got a degree, but she went back and did night classes for 2 or 3 years when I was in high school.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that's cool.
Well along. She was probably 20. She was probably in her late 30s, early 40s by then.
And so I guess maybe skipping forward a bit, when did your mom first find out about lung cancer?
It was January of 2018. So my mom had a lymph node that was inflamed, and I remember her telling me, we had this conversation where she said, they say it could be, it could just be an infection, or it could be something worse. And I could either get a scan of it done now, or a biopsy now, or I could wait, 6 weeks to get a scan because whatever she had just had done to her, the doctor for her lymph nodes, was not going to allow her to get a scan anytime soon. And there was this real discussion back and forth about, do I bother with the biopsy?
So it wasn't really a medical thing necessarily, like you have to do it?
It wasn't necessary. Well, it was, we can do this now, or we can wait a little bit and check it out in another way. It was sort of a one choice or another. And my mom was not financially in great shape. So I think there was the cost was part of the challenge.
Sure.
And then the doctor, was, I think, just trying to give options. And I was of mind, like, get the first, like, find out. Like, if it's something bad, we want to know as soon as possible. We're not going to wait, 6 weeks or 2 months to figure this out. Like, just go and get the biopsy, get it done on Tuesday. Like, just go.
Right.
And then, the biopsy came in and it was cancerous. I know one is far more common, and my mom had the uncommon one.
Okay. So I think that's the non-small one.
I think it is. I think it was, and again, this is one of those things that I was really diligent about for 18 months, and now it's just blown past. Yeah, she had non-small cell lung cancer. We'll just go with that. Which actually does play well into the story too, because my mom was a smoker her whole life, or not her whole life, but from teenage years on. Until she was diagnosed, and I remember her feeling guilty about smoking and giving herself cancer, but then hearing that this was the kind of cancer that you didn't get from smoking, and so she felt a lot less guilty. And I know even in the last week of her life, when she finally passed away, the cancer had metastasized to her brain, and she was having some cognitive challenges.
Jeez.
And one of the last conversations I had with her, she goes, "Joe, I'm just trying to remember. This started in my brain, right? Like, I didn't do this to myself. This started there."
Interesting.
And it was really emotional for me to see her concern and guilt through that conversation. I mean, she didn't say out loud, "I feel guilty and I feel concerned." She did tell one of her other confidants and friends that she felt responsible and felt like she had what was the word? Not betrayed her children, but that she had she had let us down.
Wow.
Because she got cancer.
Wow.
Which and she didn't tell me that, which honestly I'm glad she didn't tell me that, because it would have broken my heart a little bit.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That seems like she internalized that very deeply, when I feel like we know, the extensive knowledge that we have about cancer at this point. It's like, it's almost like there's a running clock on everyone on when you're going to get cancer. You know what I mean? So for your mom to like think it's her fault, that's really fascinating. Was the lymph node that you were talking about in January 2018, was that like the first time she had some kind of symptom related to lung cancer? Yeah,
absolutely. It was the first time she noticed anything. And they put her on what I since learned was a pretty standard chemo treatment. And I forget the exact names, but 2 chemicals every 3rd week for about 3 hours a day for 2 days in a row.
And chemotherapy, that's a pill that you take, is that right?
Well, this was an infusion. So my father had cancer back in 2008, and one of his chemotherapy was a pill. But yeah, so the way I think about it, or the way I describe it, which is deeply tongue-in-cheek, is radiation is where they shoot high-speed protons at your body to kill the bad parts. and chemotherapy is where they poison only the parts they don't want. And, and the reason people get sick from chemo, from my understanding, is that because, they're literally poisoning people a little bit. Supposed to be really targeted poison, but sometimes it'll make people nauseous or weak.
Also, just out of kind of curiosity, it sounds like your mom shared it very quickly with the family after she found out. She didn't have anything like that where she was trying to, like, I don't know, I guess kind of along the lines of internalizing. She didn't want to like deal with it just herself or something like that. She was pretty open for family help and that kind of thing.
Yes and no. So my mom, I've kind of forced myself into a role of knowing. My mom didn't want to say anything, and I'm trying to think. She may have tried to hold it, and part of that is because I was there with her and my dad when they went to the oncologist for my dad, a decade ago. Part of it is my mom knows that I've done leadership development with doctors, so I know how to talk to doctors and feel comfortable in a room and can ask good questions. And so I honestly don't remember if she asked me to come or if I just told her I was coming.
Sure. Yeah.
I know she didn't tell my siblings as quickly, or maybe it was that my siblings didn't tell their spouses as quickly. But there were certainly at one point in time these concentric circles of expanding knowledge. Who knew how much?
Okay.
I mean, I was there with my mom. I was with the oncologist. I was in the meetings. I called into some of them when I couldn't make it up there just to hear stuff. My mom, right after all that happened, my mom gave me a medical power of attorney. So that I had the rights to see her records and talk to the doctors on her behalf if I needed to.
Okay.
And my siblings got updates, but weren't as actively engaged. And I think that was, I think if my mom could figure out a way to do it without any of her children being actively engaged, she might have, because she didn't want us to worry about her. And I know she was really hesitant about letting her grandkids know. She didn't want, them to worry about their grandmother and have a problem with, it was my niece's senior year of high school.
Okay.
It was, there were things going on for everyone, and mom was really concerned about everyone else.
Yeah, that's actually essentially what I was driving at. As I was wondering, kind of family involvement and whether or not, that made a difference. But you mentioned that, like, straight from the get-go, as soon as she got that first lymph node observation, you kind of pushed her into getting the biopsy and everything. So it sounds like family involvement really does have an impact, or I should say really can have an impact when someone's facing something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we rolled into at that point when my mom got diagnosed, my sister lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and she and her husband are friends with someone that runs a cancer center out there. My brother lives outside of Philly, and his father-in-law is been deeply involved with a cancer center in Philly. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and have clients and colleagues that have been involved with the medical center at Duke and at UNC. So each of us were like, oh, I think we have a place. Like, maybe we can get treated here. And it turns out, the standard treatment worked well after this, in the first 6 months. But we decided that taking my mom and pulling her up from her home, which is where we all grew up. My mom's been was in the same house for 40, almost 50 years. Actually more than, 50 years. She has her friends, she rented properties, and she had her tenants who were like a new family of, like, kids that ran to her for help and that helped her with grocery shopping and different things. And
okay.
She had a network in a community in Rhode Island. And we realized if she came to one of us to stay with us for treatment, it was either going to be a lot of travel or a lot of sitting around with nothing to do in someone else's space. And I really think that not just, and this was something I had to push my ego aside a little bit for thinking, well, first of all, thinking that I need to come in and save the day in every way possible, which is, I talked to my mom about that in the last month of her life, and having her having that attitude and me having that attitude, and us trying to work past that with each other. That whatever the case was, whoever the person was telling the story, I'm the one that should be helping. But
interesting.
I had to push that aside a little bit, that ego, and realize that my mom had a community separate from her kids. It wasn't just family, but community that was really helpful to her.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's really great that she had that. So I guess kind of continuing the, her medical journey. So she gets the diagnosis, then she goes for chemo. And and then you mentioned that she lost her hair and everything. So, I mean, was it working, the chemotherapy once that started going? Okay.
Yeah. Her first scan, which they tried to do an MRI, but she freaked out from claustrophobia. And she ended up getting a CT scan. And the first one of her abdomen showed that the cancer was in her lungs, in her lymph nodes, and the radiologist, and I remember this vividly, the radiologist wrote innumerable lesions in the liver. And I got so pissed off about that. Like, you sir or ma'am, I don't know. I didn't look. You, doctor, are supposed to be, you're a scientist. You're practicing medical science. You are not a literary artist. Innumerable is not the kind of word I want to see on a medical report.
Yeah.
But it was just, the radiologist couldn't count the number of lesions in the liver.
Wow. Yeah. Actually, I was kind of curious about that because it started with a lymph node in the lung. Is that correct?
Well, it was lung cancer, but they found it in the lymph node. And then when they did the CT scan, they saw that it was also in the liver. So technically that's like stage 4 because it's in multiple organs. So it was fairly advanced cancer. The prognosis, when we first met with the oncologist in the spring, he said, if you don't do anything, you're likely to have, 2 to 3 months. And, I don't know how much of that will be good time versus just being alive. And doctors are really, I've learned this, between both my parents and having cancer, doctors are really hesitant to give a timestamp.
Right.
It's one of those things that we see on TV. Like, the doctor said I had 6 months to live. Doctors they're very, very particular. Like, this is sort of the median outcome. There's standard deviations and variability on either side. 6 months means you could live, your cancer could take you out in 2 weeks, or you could live 5 years because of statistics.
So, but they didn't even really give her, after the chemo and now the innumerable spots of the liver were done, or, were cured at that point. They didn't really give her anything after that?
There was the radiation in the fall and then regular checkups. So she went back for scans every 2 months. And the other interesting thing about the prognosis from the doctor, the original prognosis, he said, if you do chemotherapy, then, you probably have, the average is a year. But, again, some people extend it out 5+ years. Some people don't make it another 6 months. So,
Hmm.
that's, and my mom was like, okay, there's a fighting chance there. And that's what she went for. And, the irony of that is my mom passed away about, 14 months, 15 months after the prognosis of a year.
Oh.
Which means my mom was a little bit better than average. Which talking about not being glib, but I mean,
Yeah.
she got a new CT scan and
Okay.
a tumor had shown up in her brain.
Oh, okay.
And they put, the oncologist gave her another chemo course, a different one that had a lot of success in small cell lung cancer.
Okay.
But it was not, it was kind of an experiment for the non-small cell, just to see if maybe this works occasionally in this kind of cancer. And it didn't help.
So it sounds like at least from your mom's experience, if we're using that to kind of generalize a bit. So it sounds like once it's in the brain, then they're kind of like, there's nothing really definite. They're just trying to do whatever they can to keep it from spreading.
I don't know. I think, I mean, the entire treatment felt like a rear guard action from a losing army. Like, the entire treatment was
Like reactive.
Okay, this is not just reactive, but we are going to try to stop the river from flowing, but the river's going to win eventually.
Okay.
And it's because, and this is my assumption, when you've discovered cancer and it's already in 3 organs, the chance of full recovery seems really low. And one of the things about this, as I'm talking about this, it makes me think about the demeanor of the oncologist, and how he was, he wasn't overly optimistic, and he wasn't like, oh, we're going to beat this. You're going to do everything you can and you'll be great, which honestly I'm thankful for, because I wouldn't want the
defeatist or,
well, I wouldn't want the false and inappropriate sense of confidence. He wasn't defeatist either. He was kind of, he was peaceful. He was,
okay.
Matter of fact's not the right word, but he explained really difficult things with kindness and empathy.
Okay.
And honesty.
Yeah, it wasn't swinging too far in either direction. Okay.
Yeah, it was really, it worked out really well. And I imagine, in order to be, if you're an oncologist, most of the patients you see are going to end up dying sometime soon. So I think you have to build a skill set that enables you to communicate with people in that way.
Sure.
And also, I imagine, build up some emotional fortitude, because you're going to see a lot of people who are crying because they're going to be dying, and that's gotta suck. Yeah, the work of the oncologists, and maybe even more so the hospice nurses that we ended up dealing with in the end. It amazes me. It amazes me that there are people that have the strength to do that every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, the oncologist is like, I think he sort of said, I'm guessing you guys saw the reports. I'm like, yeah. He goes, yeah, this sucks. Like, this is horrible. There's like the treatment's not working. And I would advise now that you figure out, what do you want to take a trip? Do you want to see your grandkids? Like, what do you want to do? And do it in the next couple of weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. My mom was a little bit stubborn. Is like, I want to do one more course of the treatment to see if it'll help. And I was like, Mom, I don't think it's it's not going to do, if it hasn't done it yet, it's not going to work. She's like, she did. She went and did one more course of the treatment.
Okay.
And then the other thing that she did is she got angry. Mom got angry after that, not at the doctor, but just angry at things in the world. They scheduled an appointment for a hospice nurse to come and visit and talk to her. And she just blew it off because she didn't want, I don't need help. I don't need the hospice. And at this point, I think part of what was going on was she had a tumor in her brain, which can change cognition and affect. And there was no real way to check that or to see what it was. And I mean, it just, when you have things growing in your brain, you start changing subtly or not subtly. Because, it's a complex system. And when things get knocked out of whack, all of a sudden, it could be something like you smell the color purple, or it could be something that you get angry a lot faster than normal.
Interesting.
And so what I noticed, both, the conversation I said before, my mom was trying to remember how she got the cancer, that her short-term memory, her memory processing was glitchy at times. And also that emotionally she was way more likely to lash out. And that was when I talked to her about, look, I'm the person, you're the person that puts on a cape and when people need it, and I'm the person that puts on a cape when people need it. And that you don't want anyone to put on a cape for you, but that's too bad. I'm here to do that. Right. And me staying is the best thing for you. And it's the best thing for me because I can't go home right now and not be actively helping. And also I've called hospice and they're coming tomorrow. And I forced my mom to meet with hospice, and she was, she was angry. She was annoyed at the hospice nurse for, how she spoke or what she did and all the ins and outs. Mom's like, I know how hospice works. I put my husband was in hospice. I was like, Mom, hospice isn't for you right now. Hospice is as much for me and for those of us who are here with you. We need to understand. I need to understand hospice.
Wow. Yeah.
Because at a certain point, you're not going to be, you're not going to be dealing with hospice because you're going to be, too far gone.
So it sounds like the power of attorney, that was really critical, as it turns out, because, your mom is going through, neurological effects.
Yeah.
So, if you hadn't had that kind of decision making may have been really delayed. Absolutely.
In fact, I forget when hospice does their intake interviews actually. So hospice, normally hospice engages, a month earlier than with my mom, and they come once a week just to check in and say, hey, and there's a registered nurse, there's a social worker, there's a chaplain, and I forget if there's even another person to handle another aspect of it, but there's a team. Oh yeah. And I guess the other person is there's CNAs who come and do, if you need someone to bathe you, they do the sort of, and the social worker in her, onboarding interview for hospice asks about, not just physicality, but, who's around, do you have a medical power of attorney? Do you have a final directive? Do you want to, and hospice has a pretty clear, hospice puts this document together with you, whether or not you have that so that they can have it ready. Do you want, if EMTs come, do you want them to try their best to save you? Do you want them to do nothing? Do you want them to just, somewhere in between? And they go through and they're uncomfortable questions to discuss, because it's all about death and how you're going to handle it. But it's really important and valuable. And One of the things that I feel really fortunate about is that my mom, right out of the gate, as soon as the diagnosis came in, said, let's do medical power of attorney so that you can help out with all of the medical decisions and medical, if there's a time where I'm not conscious, you can, be my advocate for me. And that did work out really well and was really helpful. And I guess the only decision I really made preemptively for my mom was, I made the decision to call hospice, even though she insisted that she was fine and didn't need it.
And they came to her. She didn't have to go to a hospice.
Correct. So the hospice came for in-house hospice visits, and my first experience with hospice wasn't that great. So July 3rd, the RN came to do the intake interview and to help out with it, to coordinate stuff. The social worker was supposed to come but couldn't manage it. She came on but the 5th, I think a CNA came, and on the 6th, the social worker came, and on the 7th, no, not on the 7th, that was a Sunday. On the 8th, the RN was supposed to come back, but a different one came because it was the RN's birthday. So, in the first week, we saw 5 or 6 different people. It was kind of crazy.
Let's take a break. More of my conversation with Joe Hood in just a moment. And we're back. Is there a healthcare story you think is just not getting enough attention? Have you gone through a similar experience as Joe and wish you had known certain things beforehand? Comment this episode at rishibi.com or let me know via the Healthy Schmelthy Facebook page or send an email at therishibi@gmail.com. Appreciate any feedback or any personal stories. And before we go further, I just wanted to let everyone know that Joe Hood is a podcaster, and he has a podcast called The Mandatory Cocktail Hour, where he has interviews with different people regarding the subject of leadership. It's a great podcast, and just wanted to make sure that we got the word out for that. So thus far in this conversation, we've been talking about Joe's mom, Stephanie Hood. We've been talking about Stephanie's medical journey. Now we're going to be talking about some of the last moments of her life and overall kind of themes that we'll be talking about. When do you know it's the right time for hospice care? And what is a hospice like? Let's go ahead and get back into my conversation once again with Joe Hood.
It was rapid fire. My mom stopped eating on the 6th. She didn't realize it. She hadn't been eating a lot anyway. She just hadn't had any food. The 6th, she was insisting on getting up and going back and forth from her chair in the living room to the bed in the bedroom, because the living room is where you live and you're not going to stay in the bedroom. And I realized that my mom was still smoking and sneaking cigarettes.
Oh, really?
Actually, yeah. And I think maybe someone had told me beforehand, and I told mom, I sat in her chair once and I could smell the smoke, and she had her smoking stuff stuck in a drawer in the sideboard next to her chair. I was and I asked the hospice nurse about it. She's like, look, at this point, it's not going to hurt her anymore. It's not going to give her more cancer. And if it makes her feel better, that's fine. I was like, okay. I was worried if it would somehow interfere with the hospice care, if it would mess up with her blood pressure or something. She's like, no, it's not, it's not going to alter anything now, as long as we don't bring oxygen into the house. If there's oxygen, she can't smoke. I was, at this point in time, I'd been staying at her house since July 3rd. And helping her walk around whenever she needed it, and actually staying at her house, but not constantly being there. I was trying to get out and do things and be around and available. And I was there, overnight every night, just to make sure nothing happened in the evenings. And, on Tuesday night, my mom fell and hit her head. And then on Wednesday, she was excited. Like she zonked out and she stayed in her bed. And I started asking about being admitted into hospice care because I needed to be there constantly. It was really just sort of emotional and physically challenging. I was trying not to sleep. I was actually setting an alarm for myself to wake up every 2 hours in anticipation to see if my mom was going to go to the bathroom. I set up, my mom had a bunch of wind chimes like that she had out on her patio and decks. I took one of her wind chimes and put it on her bedroom door so that if she got up and started walking to the bathroom, it would wake me up.
Well, I think this speaks to the importance of, or why hospice is there, right? A lot of these little things that you might not think of, they're there for. I mean, you just went through this whole whirlwind of just the diagnosis and then getting rid of it from the liver. And all of a sudden she's in decline. I mean, you're probably not even thinking at that point when, we have to worry about her going to the bathroom, You
know what's funny is that the year before with the chemo and the cancer disappearing, seems like just a completely different planet,
right?
Than that. And the thing, I get angry at my mom thinking back about her not calling hospice earlier. And I feel bad, but being angry at her because she passed away. But we engaged hospice, and my mom was gone to less than 2 weeks later.
Oh,
and one of those weeks was a holiday week. So they were not fully ready for what was going on. I was freaking out. The following morning, her little stash of cigarettes were on the floor in front of her easy chair in the living room, which at that point I threw all of that away because I was not going to have my mom burn down the house while I was sleeping in it. And that was she was too stubborn. Like she was so stubborn about doing that. And then I couldn't manage keeping her safe. I talked to hospice and they're like, well, if she's, we can bring a hospital bed in and put it in her bed. And then you can get like a baby monitor to keep track to make sure, when she's up and when she's down. And we're going to change the medication from, just near bedtime to help sleep to doing it every 4 hours. A support potty that she can use in the toilet. Or actually bring the commode into the bedroom and, don't try to travel too far. And all of a sudden I realized I was now going to become a full-time nurse for however long things were going on for my mother. And I, not trained for it, also not emotionally prepared for it because it's hard to be, emotionally hard to handle all of the feelings with also this job. And I felt a lot of hesitation and guilt about the idea of sending my mom into inpatient hospice care.
Sure.
I'd already actually gotten assigned a the hospice nurse, who had been there either the day before or the day after my mom hit her head and she fell and hit her head. Totally checked off on the idea of, you're ready. Like you can, with the support system, with you being the sole support in the house and everything your mom needs, we can take her into inpatient. But I had this feeling my mom wanted to stay home.
Yeah, and I was just actually going to ask, like, they couldn't stay in the house, like 24/7 hospice care?
Hospice does not stay in the house 24/7. Part of the idea, I think, is they will support family to enable someone to die at home. And also they have a, inpatient center that you can go to. It's glib to say this, but it's kind of like someone blended a hospital wing with a spa. It's calm, it's soothing, there's woods and soft color tones. Every room has a fold out chair, actually 2 of them, so that family can stay in the room if they want to. The nurses will bring you sheets and blankets so that you can actually sleep in a real situation. They've got shower rooms for the family. They've got a wonderful cafeteria with freshly made, inexpensive food. The hospice is a serene environment, which is really a relief after being in a home alone, and no one's really taking care of the house because I'm taking care of mom, and I don't have time to do dishes and or even make food or find food. And it was I felt, this is another time where I felt guilty, but because I felt relieved when we went into hospice, and I felt bad because I thought mom wants to be home, but my mom never actually said that explicitly. That was an assumption I had made. But this was, by the time we got into hospice, my mom rode in an ambulance to hospice, and this was a hospice center up in Providence, Rhode Island. So it was about an hour away from her home. We got into hospice. My mom wasn't responsive anymore. She hadn't been responsive for the better part of a day. She was still breathing and still alive, but not interacting and having conversations anymore. So, I was thinking, again, trying to rationalize this and minimize my guilt, thinking mom doesn't know. I mean, mom might know if she's not at home, but mom can't argue about not being home right now. And this is the best place for all of us.
I mean, obviously we know, what the ending is. So, you can keep that, as your experience that you had with your mom. But I guess just kind of some things that I kind of heard in that, as far as like advice for people who, are going through a situation similar, because you brought it up yourself, and I'm forgetting what the context was, but kind of like, you're there to help your mom, but you almost have to get out of your own way in order to help her effectively, not making it about your own concern about mortality. And then another thing that I kind of heard was like addressing things immediately. So like the hospice care was suggested by your doctor and not like waiting on that. Or would those be accurate kind of takeaways as far as advice?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That whole idea of it takes a lot to let the other person have their feelings and have their experience and be there for them. I mean, for me, like, it was my mom. I had a lot of feelings going on, but I needed to be able to put hers first and either deal with mine later or figure out a way to prioritize that. And then the other one, yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a New England town where the tradition was, look, if I don't go to the doctor, I'll never be sick. The doctor tells you you're sick. Right. And so that idea, like, by avoiding and ignoring the medical potentials, you're not stopping anything from happening. It's one of those things where I guess we feel comfort in uncertainty, because uncertainty still has the possibility of a good outcome, right? Sure. Whereas, when there's certainly a bad outcome, but there are ways to mitigate, there are ways to lessen the pain as you go along. And I think that's one of the things that in palliative and hospice care, it's not about extending life as long as you can. It's about keeping quality of life as high as you can for as long as possible. And it's about acknowledging that death is coming, but it doesn't need to be horrible between then and now. We can make it good through multiple steps in the way. You just have to be, thoughtful and honest in the process.
Okay. A lot of stuff I don't know. As you're mentioning, kind of being there with your mom towards those last few months,
Mm-hmm.
the things that you're kind of seeing in yourself reflected is almost like obstacles, that's really powerful. So thanks, Joe, for sharing the story. It seemed like because we happened to be chatting in the same forum around the same time, we're in this forum for the podcasting, the America's Next Top Podcaster forum. Through our little conversations through that, it seemed like you were fairly open about talking about your mom's experiences. Is that something that's important to you? Was that important to you? And, is it, do you find that therapeutic to be fairly open about all that? I mean, obviously you're sharing it here, but was that something you actively made a decision about?
I'm sorry, are other people going to hear this? Sorry. Are you recording this? No, that's so lies take so much energy, and lies of omission are equally lies. So my mom didn't want her grandkids to know, or didn't want them to worry. And I was like, I'm not lying to my kids. I'm going to be driving up to Rhode Island every 3 weeks. I think I got to tell them something. I'm going to tell them I'm going to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
And I don't know that my other siblings did that. I think my kids weren't deeply curious about it. I mean, they're 12 and 8, and so they wanted to know, but they weren't into well, Dad, what about the liver and where is the cancer? But I told them. And my mom did want some people, she wanted to keep it close to the vest, partially because she didn't want people to fuss about her.
Mm-hmm.
But she, at one point, told me it was fine for me to tell people back home. I think partially because she knows I'm in social circles with doctors, and so I was always really open about what was going on. And since then, talking about what happened and talking about, and my training professionally from actually even as a teenager has been about, being able to articulate your feelings and the benefit of talking authentically about what's going on for you. So that has always been a powerful thing for me.
Yeah.
One of the things I did actually while I was going on, I felt a little isolated when I was in the house with just my mom, and over that time period, and I started leaning back into the podcasting experience, and I have now about 10 to 20 little audio journals from 30 seconds to 3-minute long ones throughout the process. I wanted to mark what was going on. I wanted to record what was going on somehow.
Sure.
Traditionally, I would use a journal, but I was driving someplace, and I wasn't going to be able to stop and process my thoughts and calm and write down. So I recorded all these, and I'm now trying to figure out actually what to do with them. I might try to put them together in some sort of narrative or educational form to help other people. Because I know one of the things that occurred to me somewhere in the process, actually after my mom passed away, and then I went and talked to her lawyer about all the will and legal stuff, because I'm the executor of her will. I realized that my understanding of the whole what happens in the doctor's office and how you go through chemotherapy was deeply influenced by watching medical dramas, but not completely, because I knew doctors and have seen their world.
Right.
But even the time after, like my understanding of how wills work and all that works is from watching movies where like the person dies and then everyone gets in a room 3 days later and they read the will and everyone walks away with their stuff and their jewels in the and the second wife gets all the yachts. Like, that's how wills work. Right. But turns out now there's a whole lengthy process, and actually getting an inheritance is something that my siblings and I won't see anything for probably 6 months. We've got to sell a house and liquidate all the physical assets and figure out all the actual assets and pay off medical bills and do all the ins and outs of that. So one of the things I was thinking about with the audio recordings I have is being able to make something that can help people understand the process before they get into it, about, being there with a parent that's passing away and what that can be like. So, I don't, my experience isn't universal, but it's authentically what happened.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely, talking and sharing about it has definitely been a key part of the process for me, and helped me stay centered throughout it all.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joe, for talking with me and sharing the story.
Oh, you're welcome, Rishi.
Okay, and that was my conversation with Joe Hood. Some of the different tools that he mentioned is actually aligns with some things that I've been looking at, because in my personal life, I am getting more interested in different tools and different facets of end-of-life care. So at the show notes for this episode, I'll share some tools and information links that I've been finding helpful for myself, and those also align with some of the topics that Joe brought up. For example, the National Institute of Aging has a list of different topics to make sure that you think about when you're getting your affairs in order. And so I'll share the link for that at the show notes for this episode. And also, Joe and I, we talked quite a bit about the importance of his mom, Stephanie, declaring Joe as the medical power of attorney. That's something that my takeaway from this conversation was that was very important. However, I've looked into that myself, and that varies state by state. So you can get more information about that. WebMD actually lists some of the different facets that differ state by state. So I'll have a link to that. And all those links are at rishibee.com, RISHIBEE.com. Thank you very much for listening, and take care.